Ah, my back! Jesus! So, good day everyone. Today is Tuesday. It's NA's reset. Tomorrow is going to be EU's reset. It's going to be the first reset since the start of this Legion Timewalking event, which we now know has been extended by an extra couple of weeks until the start of January. So effectively from now on, more or less, there are still 3 weeks to go for this event, to go into the Mage Tower and to play in the Mythic Plus Legion dungeons. So as we wait a little bit more before we can start gathering some data as the progression of players in the challenges, perhaps taking a look at which of the challenges are consider the hardest, the challenges that are being completed the least compared to others. In the meantime, we can look at another thing, which has been the first week of this Legion Mythic Plus, because we, on top of not going through the raid for almost 3 weeks, we also haven't looked at Mythic Plus that much in detail in the past few weeks. And this time around, we have something interesting, because not only can we look at how things are going in Mythic Plus, but now we have something shiny, we have something new and different to look at, which is the Legion Mythic Plus data, the stats, the players joining the Legion Mythic Plus, and how the situation has been going in there. To be fair, there isn't really too much for you to get in the Legion Timewalking event. You can buy pretty much all the stuff that's available from the Legion Mythic Plus with Time Warp badges, which you might already have on one of your characters, so you don't really need the Legion Mythic Plus. And as a result, if you don't need the gear, if you don't need the 246 item level upgradable gear that drops from the dungeon itself, it's not that you need to go in there. There is no achievement, there is no title, there is no mount, there is nothing in there really. So, perhaps it's not going to be as relevant, but we can already see some differences compared to what we have seen the last times in Mythic Plus. It's also easier to see any different trends, because effectively all of the numbers, all of the participation of players in these Legion Mythic Plus keys started just last week. So we don't have months and months and months of data being aggregated over time, so we can much more easily see some changes in trends. Perhaps if some specs have grown, if some specs have become more popular. Mythic Plus in this patch was opened pretty much in July. So since then, it might have taken a long time to see some trends, to see some specs becoming more popular, but this time around, with this new temporary game mode of Legion Mythic Plus, is just 1 week old. So we can see some changes compared to what we have seen up to this point in Mythic Plus, which is exactly what we are going to be taking a look at in today's video. The Mythic Plus situation, looking at the Legion Timewalking event compared to how it's been going in the past few weeks in the normal Mythic Plus keys. Is there any difference so far? So with this in mind, let's start to take a look at the differences, looking first for tanks. We have pointed out before how this Season 2 of Mythic Plus started with the overtaking of Guardian Druid over Vengeance Demon Hunter. Vengeance Demon Hunter was the star of Season 1, was the most popular tank, not just in Mythic Plus, but in raids as well. And then, after the round of nerfs to Vengeance by the end of 9.0.5, getting close to 9.1, and the buffs to other tanks, Guardian Druid gained more and more popularity to the point that it was the more widespread tank. This was the situation at the start of 9.1.5 for tanks, and still the overall numbers told us that Guardian Druid was very close to Protection Paladin. As we always say, for reasons unknown, Protection Paladin remains a very popular tank, regardless of whether or not it's meta or very, very popular at high keys or in top guilds in raid encounters. It's still very played. So the difference with this, with the first week of Legion Mythic Plus, is that Protection Paladin is now even more popular than the normal Mythic Plus keys. In fact, it is 20% more popular than the normal Mythic Plus keys, and even Guardian Druid has slightly improved in popularity. This means that if both of the most popular specs have improved in popularity, some of the least popular specs are getting even less popular. You can see Protection Warrior losing quite a lot of representation between the normal keys and the Mythic Plus keys in Legion, which is pretty much the main culprit for the gains of Protection Paladin and Guardian Druid. When we start looking at higher keys compared to just the entirety of the population, so keys higher than 15, yeah, sure, keys higher than 15 are not going to give you an achievement, or they're not going to give you the rating you need for your mounts in Legion Mythic Plus Timewalking, but it's a good check mark, it's a good threshold to see the different levels of specs. Not too much changes. The Protection Paladin remains very popular, still has a 20-ish% gain compared to its normal self, and even worse, Protection Warrior gets even less popular. So the current situation is the problem for Protection Warrior, we can say. If we had to pinpoint a problem we might want to see fixed for 9.2, I think Protection Paladin is poised to do quite well in 9.2, especially if you go and look at the tier sets of Protection Paladin, the possible double legendary combination of Protection Paladin. Same discussion is for Guardian Druid, is also doing quite well. Same for Vengeance Demon Hunter, provided the set is not gonna get nerfed. Brewmaster Monk, especially with the rework of the tier set, is also poised to do quite well. Blood Decay is likely probably not as exciting, but the real one that should perhaps require the most help out of all of the tanks at the moment is definitely Protection Warrior, who hasn't really... They still have not gotten out of the slump since the times of BFA, since essentially having all of its band-aid fixes from BFA taken away from them. The Azerite armor traits together with the corruptions and the fumbling around of the talents from the Warriors talent tree, preventing them from going for their old build in BFA. After all of that happened in BFA, they have not really been able to recover in Shadowlands so far, no matter what the borrowed power they were trying to use. So it's probably time for them to get a little bit of a help before 9.2 comes out. Now, after the tanks, we have the healers. Unfortunately, the healers are kind of behaving in a very similar way as what the tanks are doing. Just like the tanks, you already have two very popular specs because they are also popular at high keys and very high competitive level, which is Shaman and Paladin. And just like tanks, there is also another spec which remains popular regardless of its status in very high competitive keys, which is Restoration Druid. Restoration Druid is very, very popular, regardless of whether or not they are powerful at the moment. Perhaps it is a leftover from BFA and even Legion. Restoration Druid used to be the be-all, end-all of healers in Mythic Plus keys, and even though in this expansion they definitely have not been, many players still stick to playing Resto. The main thing we can see in this transition from normal Mythic Plus keys to Legion Mythic Plus keys is that Restoration Shaman gets even more popular, just like Protection Paladin, over a 20% increase as healers got into Legion Mythic Plus keys. The main losses to allow Shaman to grow this much in Legion Mythic Plus went against Discipline Priest primarily, and a little bit of Resto Druid and Holy Priest as well, which is unlucky. You know, these are already the least played specs to begin with, so you might want to see them grow and not the opposite, but that's the situation in the normal overall keys of Mythic Plus. Once we go in the higher keys, into the plus 15 and higher, the situation is almost the same again, because Shaman, if anything, grows even more than before. Again, another 20, this time even closer to a 30% increase compared to their normal Mythic Plus keys, while pretty much all of the other specs, bar perhaps Mistweaver, are losing grounds in favor of Resto Shaman. There might be perhaps some hope in 9.2 that the tier set bonuses of Resto Shaman are basically gonna do nothing in Mythic Plus, so at the very least you know they're not really gonna gain any power in Mythic Plus from that. Unfortunately, their legendary combo seems to be very, very powerful for Mythic Plus, for the damage portion of the healer's job in Mythic Plus, so that's kind of unlucky for the other healers who are already lagging behind in damage, specs like Holy Priest, specs like Resto Druid, and even Mistweaver Monk, which will be able to a degree to increase their damage done now that they can use two legendaries, but it doesn't seem it's going to be able to match up with what Resto Shamans will get, so it's kind of unlucky. That is basically what you are hoping when you go from one patch to the next to fix the more glaring problems of some specs. And if we look at Mythic Plus, pretty much some of the major issues of many of the healers is their lack of damage. Either their continued damage over time or perhaps just the burst damage that they don't have, and so far the tier sets and the legendary combos are not really giving too much to these other healers, which is kind of sad. Moving on, however, to melee DPS now. So, as we have gotten through several weeks in the melee DPS camp, what we have seen was that warriors were getting quite popular. Combined, especially, they were the most popular class overall, even more so than rogues. That was surprising. And then Windwalker Monk and Havoc as a standalone spec for DPS in their class that were doing very well. Both of them for months, actually. Ever since they got buffed, especially Havoc, ever since Havoc got buffed, they gained a lot of the popularity that they lost. In the first season of Mythic Plus, Havoc was not doing too hot, and then eventually they got back up to their old BFA and even Legion selves. And it's not gonna be too exciting. It's not gonna be too exciting to know that this was the situation at the start of 9.1.5, and now that we are getting into Legion Timewalking Mythic Plus, Havoc Demon Hunter is gaining even more ground. They, just like Protection Paladin and just like Resto Shaman, are 20% more popular in Mythic Plus keys for Legion compared to the normal ones. Just slight increase for Windwalker as well, but the primarily big gain is for Havoc. The other big gain, quite big in fact, 30 plus, near 40% increase, is to Fury. You know, at this breakpoint, the release of 9.1.5, Fury was already getting up to match arms. What happened for the non-warrior players is that this expansion launched and Fury looked to be the better one, except arms got buffed over time, multiple times, up to the point that arms became the best one over Fury by quite a good margin, so that everyone went to play arms. So Blizzard, like a pendulum, swung back all the way to Fury, and they started buffing Fury instead. So over time, Fury has taken back up the spot over arms warriors. For the moment, it's just happening in Mythic Plus due to the much better cleave and consistent AoE of Fury Warriors. It's not happened yet in Red Encounters. Red Encounters are still the domain of arms for the moment. But just looking at the Mythic Plus, we can see that it's pretty clear that as you reset the count, as you reset the stats and the numbers from Legion Mythic Plus, and you don't have months and months and months worth of a 9.1 patch data from Mythic Plus, and you go into Legion Mythic Plus, you can see that Fury is much more prevalent and popular compared to arms, much more so than what we have gotten up to this point in the normal Mythic Plus keys. Most of the other specs are pretty much getting shrunk because, as we said, Warrior is increasing, Windwalker is slightly increasing, Havoc is significantly increasing, which means most of the other specs are going to be losing popularity. So Retribution is getting smaller, both of the DK specs are getting smaller, Enhancement and even Feral Druid are all getting smaller. The only one who increases at the cost of the other specs in its class is Subtlety Rogue. Just like Fury, Subtlety was another one of the specs that was gaining ground over time compared to the other Rogue specs, except that, you know, up to this point in 9.1, we had almost 1 million logs for all keys for the melee DPS, whereas now that we get to reset the numbers in Legion Mythic Plus, we can see more clearly that Subtlety is becoming the more widespread choice for rogue players in Mythic Plus. Is there any particular change in higher keys, so in keys 15 or higher? The only particular change is that the more popular specs become more popular with a focus on Subtlety. Subtlety becoming even more prevalent in higher keys, so does Windwalker, which gains even more ground compared to their normal overall all keys. So this paints a more clear picture. Even when you look at the two graphs compared, you can see there are basically 4 towers standing out compared to the other specs. You have Havoc, Windwalker, Subtlety, and Fury as the main standout specs. So, talking about standout specs, what we have left is the range DPS. So, the range DPS had another one of these switcheroos, very, very similar to what happened to Warrior, which is Hunter. Hunter got for weeks the rise of Beast Mastery. Unlike Warrior, on the other hand, Beast Mastery already rose well past Marksmanship in the raid as well. We pointed out our arms was still keeping up the popularity for raiding compared to Fury, but for Hunters it's not like that at all. Marksmanship has been passed by Beast Mastery some 1 month ago, and in Mythic Plus it's happening the same. We stopped right before the start of this patch, and Marksmanship was still slightly ahead in the entirety of the population. and now this is the result of this growth of Beast Mastery. Now Beast Mastery is also considerably ahead than Marksmanship in Mythic Plus keys. Some of the other things worth pointing out is that Frost is another one of the specs that was gaining ground over the other ones. Frost was losing ground as Fire Mage was getting buffed, as they were becoming stronger, or at the very least perceived as better in the community. But then Frost was buffed, and also Frost was still the more complete AoE spec for Mythic Plus, and now in Legion Mythic Plus we can see the very clear standout spec for mages being Frost. As a result, of course, of these specs gaining ground, other more niche specs like Shadow Priest are losing popularity in Mythic Plus for Legion, so did Elemental, which is perhaps the biggest drop, especially if we consider that Elemental was on a pretty big rise in 9.1. Their AoE power in Mythic Plus was being considered quite a lot in high keys even, so this is pretty surprising to see that they are losing a little bit more. But when you consider that Frost Mage also has a very consistent and heavy AoE and they are becoming this popular, perhaps that's why Elemental Shaman is losing ground as a result. When we look at keys higher than 15, we do have a similar situation with Frost Mage becoming even more tyrannical in its own class, cannibalizing the other two specs. We still see Beast Mastery being quite ahead of Marksmanship. We also do see something that we have seen before multiple times, which is in the overall population, Destruction Warlock is the most popular spec in Mythic Plus, for whatever reason, considering they are not very good. But the higher you go in keys and the more consistent spec you will find in high keys for Warlocks is going to be Affliction, not Destruction. This is going to be the same in Mythic Plus for Legion as well, not just the normal Mythic Plus keys. So this trend is continuing. The only other thing worth pointing out as far as changes in popularity of the specs is Balance Druid. We have pointed out how Beast Mastery was growing and even Frost Mage was growing, just like the melee specs that were popular like Windwalker and Fury and Havoc were also growing. One of the specs that was popular and still is but didn't grow and in fact lost almost 20% of its popularity in Mythic Plus for Legion is Balance Druid. Balance Druid has lost not just in the overall keys but also in the high keys. No matter the level of the key, they are still losing representation, so that's an interesting point to go over. And that is what we have at the moment. It's going to be just, interesting to keep this sort of like as a time capsule, just to see what's going to happen with the changes in 9.2 and how much, or rather how many of these specs are going to be given a lift in their power. We pondered about this for the raid encounters as well. We tried to see the current power, the current meta level of the specs in raiding compared to how strong are their 9.2 tier sets or 9.2 double legendary combos looking like, just to see in how good of a position they are planned for 9.2. This discussion could be similar for Mythic Plus, just to see how well poised certain specs are to do well in the next patch. Of course, perhaps in Mythic Plus the more important thing is going to be damage, both for tanks and for healers. It's likely that doing more damage, doing more burst damage, or for tanks especially having better and shorter cooldown defensives to use each pack, that is likely going to be the most important thing. And for DPS, likely the more important part of your tier set and the more important part of your double legendary is going to be being able to have more AoE. In short, perhaps having more burst if you already have AoE, having more burst for that AoE to work even better, or just giving you more AoE in general. For example, specs like Demonology Warlock, they're gonna continue to look like not really viable in Mythic Plus as long as they lack easy to apply consistent AoE for each pack in Mythic Plus. Same can be said for specs like Arcane, specs like Shadow Priest, specs like Assassination Rogue. So these are the things we will have to look for in 9.2 when we want to look at the power of specs in Mythic Plus, which is gonna be different, of course, than the power of specs for raid encounters. For raid encounters, it's not as important. The difference between the burst or the continuous damage is more like having more and higher single target damage in general. So it's likely also going to be easier for certain specs that are weak in that department to become stronger in raiding than for Mythic Plus and for AoE. But we will see. At the moment, this is what we have for the Mythic Plus Legion Timewalking. We will likely check this again not next week because it's perhaps a little bit too early. Perhaps in a couple of weeks we will take a look at it, and perhaps even once the event is ended next year at this point, since it will end on January the 4th. So we will see then if anything of note has changed in the meantime. But for now we can stop here. I'm gonna leave you to the rest of your Tuesday, to the rest of your new reset, or perhaps to the rest of the last day of the reset if you are in EU still. So as usual, guys, thank you for watching the video. If you want to continue supporting the channel, watching videos is honestly enough. But if you want to do more, you can subscribe to the channel, leave a like down on the video, as well as leaving down a comment. If you don't know what to say, you can still close your eyes and just randomly move your hand on the keyboard and press send. That's gonna work just fine as well. I will be able to transcribe what you meant anyways. See you guys soon, and in the meantime, the new lore book of WoW Eastern Kingdoms apparently is racist. Oh man, that's gonna be a fun read.